So to kick it off, as I mentioned, as you know, this is the 10-year anniversary of CoinDesk. It is also 10 years since Jeremy Allaire launched the iconic crypto company Circle. Over that time, there were a bunch of shifts and pivots, changes, new ideas, and they landed on, in the end, one that is by far its most successful, and that is the USDC stablecoin. Now, in the wake of a banking crisis and the emergence of interesting regulatory ideas around this, Circle finds itself at the epicenter of a discussion around the transformation of money. So to talk about all of this, I am delighted to invite to the stage Jeremy Allaire.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay. So the title for this session, Jeremy, as you know, has the word rollercoaster in it, because it has been quite a ride.
Some people like roller coasters, some people don't.
I think you do. You've told me some stories about helicopters that make me think that you have a bit of a thrill streak in you. But ultimately, yeah, you started out as a payments app, you know, with Bitcoin as the rails for moving fiat. You moved into Circle Trade. You bought an exchange, Poloniex. You sort of indirectly found your way into a crowdfunding ATS at that point. And in the middle of it all, you know, USDC comes along, and it becomes this significant phenomenon. I imagine at that point you probably felt, phew, things have calmed down. We've found our thing. Silicon Valley Bank suddenly has a bit of trouble, and it shuts down. And you had a rather difficult weekend. The peg was lost for a little bit, but you managed to figure out an alternative banking solution, and it stabilized again. But in some respects, I think, you know, that moment brought home the why we're here in a way, right? Like it spoke to the fragility of the existing system. So talk us through that. What was that weekend like, and what has it meant for you guys?
Yeah, you know, I'll get to that weekend in a second, but I think just to capture, I think, the idea, you know, this goes back to the founding of the company 10 years ago, which, you know, like a lot of people who have gotten into this industry, you know, there was sort of a reaction to the global financial crisis of 2008, and I personally spent a huge amount of time trying to understand the nature of money, how the banking system works, central banking, the international monetary system, and that was before I had any knowledge of Bitcoin or of any of this. And I think the philosophy of sound money is one that pervades you know, this whole arena, and very specifically this idea that, and this was again kind of origin vision of the company, that if you could take what we think of as money, which is essentially the direct obligations of a government, which is what fiat money is, and you could express that in a digital currency form and make it available through open protocols on the internet the same way we have other things, that would dramatically change both the underlying safety of money and its general use and utility in the world. It would also open up extraordinary new opportunities for how you could arrange economic activity and financial activity. That was sort of the core idea as we started the company, and we could trace that through. But kind of fast forwarding, you know, I'm getting to that weekend. But fast forwarding, you know, we have always aspired to try and have a model where a digital dollar is what is the embedded risk, that a digital dollar should be as close as possible to, you know, a direct obligation of the government. And we've been advocating for that for a long time, for a full reserve digital currency banking model, and that separates essentially the base layer of money and the payment utility from lending activity. And that's because I believe that there is, you know, a Chase dollar or a Silicon Valley Bank dollar or a First Republic dollar or a XYZ bank in the Bahamas dollar. I don't know what the risk is.
Right.
I don't know what that risk is. And so we've always wanted to move towards that and have been trying to move towards that. And I think we're going to get there, and we'll come back to that. But coming into that weekend, it does get to this core issue, which is that, you know, cash, which everyone thinks is the safest thing in the world, is actually the IOU risk of the underlying bank. And so there was all this talk actually about, people couldn't make payroll, and there's probably a lot of companies here who couldn't make payroll or whatnot. Why is it that that base layer of money that's needed for payments needs to be subjected to all the risk-taking and investment and lending basis there? So I think for one, coming into that weekend, like one is absolutely total shock, right? Because I think it happened with incredible speed. I mean, the unraveling of Silicon Valley Bank was as fast as the unraveling of Terra Luna or FTX, and obviously SVB had nothing to do with crypto. And so we're seeing that literally today in the rising price of Bitcoin and the unraveling of First Republic Bank. And so there is this issue, and it persists. And the development of crypto and the vision of stablecoins has, for me at least, been how do you establish a safer and more capable internet superpower-enabled dollar? And yes, we've kind of successfully navigated this crisis and have actually upgraded the market infrastructure behind USDC to be by far the strongest, safest digital dollar on the internet today, hands down. There's no question. Like alternatives, we don't know much about. We don't know where they bank, what the risk is, anything. And so I think we have the greatest transparency and safety that's there today, but it's not safe enough. We need to go further, and for that we need legal and regulatory changes.
All right, yeah, so I mean, this First Republic news, I think pretty interesting. You've cited that. There is Bitcoin pushing up towards 30,000 again today. It may be a reaction to that, and it seems yet again we're exposing this. But at the same time, of course, a key part of your strategy is to get access to the Federal Reserve's lending window to be recognized as a licensed provider, presumably as a fully reserve bank, not as a fractional reserve, to those banks you're talking to. But we had some news last night. Our own Christian Sander was reporting on the fact that the Fed had changed some regulations around this facility, allowing for, I think, mutual funds to access this RRP project, and it looks like Circle's being cut out from that, at least in terms of our reporting. Maybe can you speak to that for one, and then I just want to talk just more broadly about why it's important to have access to the Fed.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple things. I don't know that the reporting's accurate, so meaning specific eligibility requirements around reverse repo. There's an issue that's happening right now, as people have seen in the banking system, which is there's people taking their money out of commercial banks, and they're trying to put them into various types of vehicles that are, oftentimes, kind of money market fund structures. And I think there's a concern that you're going to see, significant amounts of money in the deposit base, which is the basis in theory for lending activity, shifting into just getting onto the Fed's balance sheet. And I think that's the bigger concern, is that there's been a flood. We've seen that. We've seen the biggest banks see their deposits decline because people don't want to get paid no interest, and so they'd rather figure out ways to get, quote unquote, the risk-free rate by shifting it onto the Fed's balance sheet. I think that's probably the
Fed's just trying to make sure that there's some facility there to help out what is a kind of an alternative banking system that's emerging around.
Yeah, so I don't know that that's like specific to what we.
To what you are, but there is, so there's there is some. I mean, certainly we have seen some bank lobbyists speak out and say that the Fed shouldn't be working with stablecoins. Talk a little bit about that, though, because it clearly is on your roadmap. You do want this license.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is if you look at what the federal regulators have recommended through things like the Presidential Working Group report on stablecoins, if you look at regulations that are popping up in other parts of the world, if you look at multiple drafts of the stablecoin bills here, which is a very live issue, they all actually sort of say, we don't want stablecoins to be backed by commercial bank deposits. We want it to be backed by, basically, the cash, reverse repos, treasury bills, short-term treasury bills. And so the body of law that's emerging is obviously supportive of this view of, if you're going to have a cash-like instrument on the internet, and people can depend upon that to settle a transaction, and it's floating around on the internet, you want that to not be exposed to all that underlying bank risk. And so I think the regulatory view ultimately is very aligned with this. And I think in many ways, what we're facing today, in my view, is a world where we have very active de-dollarization taking place. You're having very significant reactions to the U.S. risks in the U.S. banking system, risks with the U.S. government itself, geopolitical imposition on many parts of the world, the desire for alternative payment systems all around the world. And this is happening, and it's accelerating. And so the question in my mind is, how can we make sure that the dollar in the age of the internet is safer and more competitive? And I don't think we have a stablecoin bill in front of us. I think we have a dollar competitiveness bill in front of us, which is how to make the dollar on the internet competitive and safe.
So speak to that, because clearly, regulation's a hot topic right now. A lot of, let's say, somewhat amount of angst amongst the crypto community in Washington about this, regulation by enforcement mode that seems to be underway, certainly at the SEC, and some concern that, the U.S. is sort of lagging what's happening elsewhere in the world. You just mentioned, so it's not a stablecoin. Some people are saying the stablecoin bill should be, it may be the first off the cab that finally gets done. Are you saying that legislation itself will now be reshaped, or are you just thinking about the way it's confirmed? And what do you see in terms of the prospects of actually something comprehensive happening?
Yeah, so I guess a couple things. An earlier draft, which was circulated under Waters' chairmanship on the committee, had both these rules around digital dollars that are privately issued using blockchain technology, aka stablecoins, right? So a way to deal with regulating these and making these instruments as safe as possible, and making sure that there's good boundaries around that they're supervised as an activity of the Federal Reserve, right? So that was one key piece, and we fully support that. Another key piece of the earlier draft was that it should authorize the Fed and Treasury to further pursue, studying how to upgrade the dollar, the core systems of the dollar itself, to have the core systems of the Fed become more digitally native, and I'm very supportive of that. And so I think we need to upgrade the core systems of the dollar so that the dollar remains safe and competitive, and we need to upgrade the way in which dollars can be expressed and used on the internet, and have that be as safe as possible. And if you can combine those, you could reinvigorate dollar competitiveness, and the dollar could be the preferred currency of the internet. And there's a real opportunity there. And I think it would be a giant missed opportunity for the United States if Congress and the government doesn't get their act together on this, because the world is moving on.
Right, it doesn't look that there's a lot of unity in Washington right now around these things, and so there are, I mentioned it in my opening remarks, companies are looking to go elsewhere. You're not leaving the United States, obviously, but you have your interests overseas as well. Talk a little bit about that. What do you see as international opportunities? I
mean, it's tremendous. I mean, the demand for digital dollars like USDC is highly global. We see that demand all around the world. We see it in emerging markets. We see it in markets where people want to hold a digital dollar versus their local banking system. Local banking systems are weak. Government regimes are weak. And as an efficient medium of exchange for various types of international transactions, there's a lot. So international is actually where the action is for stablecoins and for USDC specifically. And so we're investing a lot in that. And what does that really mean? I mean, one is we're going to the jurisdictions where they have clear rules around firms like ours, in the EU and with France leading the way. We continue to pursue new types of regimes in the UK where they're putting in place new rules imminently. Singapore, and we've seen really strong progress in the UAE. We're seeing very strong progress in Hong Kong. And so financial market centers around the world are moving forward on this, and we're investing behind that. And ultimately, the goal for us is, we want to make sure that USDC as a settlement layer and USDC as a digital asset is as liquid and available and connected to the banking systems in as many places of the world as possible. And that's really what we're trying to build out right now.
I guess sadly we only have just a little bit more than a minute left here, Jeremy. But I think, given this again, wild ride that you've had over the last 10 years. What are some of the lessons? We've got a lot of folks here who are founders, startups, looking to get into this space. Really, just some of them starting out different journeys. What are your takeaways? What is your advice to people who are getting in here from all that you've learned from these 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's
still
a lot of
1 minute.
It's definitely not a minute question. But I mean, look, you know, to the title on the discussion, right? I tell every employee that I interview or recruit or hire at Circle that this is going to be the hardest job you've ever had. This is going to be really hard. It's going to be more demanding psychically. It's going to be more demanding ultimately physically. It's going to be more demanding in terms of your time.
It's a butt coming here.
And it's going to be really hard. And so I ask people, like, do you understand that? And you know, because that's really going to be the case, and it is hard. I think, like, a durable change and you know, going out and trying to ultimately evolve very massive systemic institutional structures, it's really hard. And it takes an extraordinary amount of patience. And so that's the other thing, is that I think there's a lot of eyes bigger than stomach. You know, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And it really is, it's very incremental. It takes a very long time. And I was aware of that even when I started the company. I told my investors and employees, like, this is a 10 to 20 year project. And here we are 10 years in. And we're actually just now completing the 1.0 vision of the company, which is what USDC represents, which is the 1.0 vision of the company. We have a 2.0 vision, which hopefully the next 10 years will help us.
But hopefully, you know, you hear that, a tough job, going to be exhausting, but rewarding, right? I mean, precisely because of the impact that you potentially have.
If you want to have impact, it's hard, but it's great. It's thrilling, like a roller coaster.
Yeah. All right then, Jeremy, thank you so much. A round of applause to Jeremy Allaire.